My name is Josh Atkins, and this is a scientific presentation on the effects of distal limb cold water immersion on cycling performance in a controlled heat environment. So the presentation outline will go through physiological response to heat, research hypothesis and study methodology, the results and discussion, conclusion, followed by practical applications for athletes and coaches. When you exercise in heat, your cardiovascular system has two main jobs: deliver oxygen-rich blood to your working muscles and send blood to the skin to release heat to cool down. To cool yourself, the body dramatically increases blood flow to the skin via cutaneous vasodilation. This brings large volumes of warm blood to the surface area, allowing heat to dissipate into the environment via evaporation from the skin. Because so much blood is being redirected to the vast network of vessels in your skin, there is less blood in central circulation available to return to the heart. This decrease in blood returning to the heart is a reduction in venous return. There is a reduction in stroke volume as there is less blood returning to the heart via the venous system. To compensate for the lower stroke volume and maintain adequate cardiac output to the muscles, the heart is forced to beat progressively faster. This results in a gradual increase in heart rate even when exercise intensity remains consistent. These combined physiological effects are what are known as cardiovascular drift. Consequently, the resulting factors lead to an increase in perceived exertion and fatigue. The hands are exceptional heat exchangers due to atriovenous anastomoses, or AVAs. By immersing the hand in cold water, it creates a steep thermal gradient, cooling the venous return before it re-enters the systemic circulation. This lowers both skin and core temperature, and as both Iwashi and colleagues and Ruddock and colleagues demonstrated, also reducing cardiovascular drift and perceived heat exertion. To contextualize our experiment within the broader literature, we turn to the 2024 meta-analysis by Yu and colleagues. Their findings show in figures 1 through 3 provide quantitative evidence that pre-cooling significantly enhances performance in heat with a standardized mean difference of plus 0.38. Importantly, they also report a reduction in end exercise core temperature and significant decreases in both thermal sensation and perceived exertion. These combined effects suggest that cooling improved performance not merely by altering physiology, but influencing perception. Which leads us to our research hypothesis. Cold water distal limb immersion for 6 minutes immediately prior to a 4-minute maximal effort will improve cycling performance compared with no cooling. This was a single participant randomized crossover trial conducted over 2 separate occasions, 7 days apart at the same time of day. The participant was a healthy male and had high frequency of exercise. The equipment utilized within the study was an ESSA pre-screening tool done prior to the baseline measurements, heart rate monitor, core temperature thermometer used via infrared in the ear, and the TacTec 7 to gain a constant measure of the water temperature. It took place on a Wattbike ergometer. 2 buckets were used to ensure that when submerged, water level was up to the elbows. This also included ice bricks, a Perda board for dexterity testing, and a centrifuge for measuring the hematocrit. Three different scales were used. There was the Borg RP scale, thermal sensation scale, and thermal discomfort scale. To the study design. Upon arrival, the participant would complete ESSA pre-screening form to ensure they were fit and free from the injury to allow them to participate. We would gather measures such as height and weight, as well as blood samples for measuring hematocrit and their initial reading of core temperature. We would fit them with a heart rate monitor, and prior to the conclusion of baseline, we would conduct a dexterity test. After the 30-minute baseline, they would enter the heat chamber set at 30 degrees and 60% humidity and remain in there for the entire duration of the study, only exiting at completion or the expression of wishing to end the trial. More now on the exercise protocol. Once in the chamber, the participant would start work immediately. The warm-up would consist of 20 minutes of 50% VO2 max. It came out to 120 watts. Heart rate and perceptual measures were taken every minute on the minute, and core temperature was taken every 5 minutes from the onset until completion of the warm-up. Once the warm-up was completed, the participant was moved to a seated position on the ground. Still within the chamber, they then placed their arms in 2 buckets provided. They did this irrespective of the control or the cooling protocol. However, within the control, there was no water within the buckets. In the cooling protocol, the water was chilled prior to between 12 and 15 degrees and was monitored continuously via the TacTec 7 thermometer, maintaining a consistent temperature of 12.2 degrees with a standard deviation of 0.2 degrees Celsius. During both conditions, Heart rate and perceptuals were taken every minute on the minute. Core temperature was taken at the conclusion of the 6 minutes and prior to the 30-second dexterity test. Upon completion of the dexterity test, the participant performed a maximum effort for 4 minutes. Heart rate was recorded every minute on the minute, and at the conclusion of the 4 minutes, core temperature and perceptuals were taken. And upon exiting the chamber as soon as possible, hematocrit was also taken. Distance and mean power were recorded from the ergo bike. So to analysing the results. With regards to performance, the primary measure was distance covered in a maximal effort. It was found that there was no statistical significance between pre-cooling and no cooling when it came to distance covered. With the cooling protocol achieving 36 meters greater than the non-cooling, it was a gain of 1.4%. So in relation to time trial, Wegman and colleagues' review analysed 27 different studies and found that pre-cooling had a clear and positive effect on endurance tests. Specifically, they calculated that pre-cooling improved time trial performance by an average of 4.2%. Whereas Yu and colleagues, in their more recent meta-analysis, which combined the results of 15 randomized control trials, also concluded that pre-cooling significantly improved time trial performance in hot conditions. In regards to mean power, we found that after the cooling protocol, there was an increase in 12% compared to the no cooling. Awashi and colleagues found that mid-exercise cooling intervention directly improved power output. After a 15-minute distal limb immersion during a simulated halftime, the mean power output during the cycling protocol was significantly greater in the cooling condition compared to the controlled, at 6.2%. With regards to the physiological adaptations to cooling, there was no statistical significance between trials when it came to changes in core temperature, with a difference of negative 0.79% in the cooling protocol compared to the control. A meta-analysis by Yu and colleagues concluded that pre-cooling works by lowering the athlete's initial core temperature to create the physiological heat sink, which delays fatigue. In contrast, we found performance improved even though the 6-minute cooling protocol did not significantly lower core temperature. So there was a greater significance in the meta-analysis conducted by Yu and colleagues compared to ours. With respect to perceptuals, when assessing thermal discomfort during the cooling phase, it was reported that there was a greater discomfort during the initial stages of the cooling protocol. However, it was also reported that overall discomfort post-maximal effort was lowered when pre-cooling had taken place compared to no cooling. Thermal sensation was reported lower during the pre-cooling phase and remained lower at the conclusion of the max effort than that of the no cooling phase. It is important to note that as a single participant case study, these results cannot be generalized. However, they provide a valuable comparison to the existing literature. The positive performance outcome, despite the very brief cooling duration, may indicate that this individual is a hyper responder to the perceptual benefits of cold water immersion. In conclusion, our findings show that pre-cooling the hands for just 6 minutes prior to a maximal effort can be an effective strategy. This resulted in an increased mean power output of 12%. Increasingly, the mechanism appears to be perceptual and not physiological. So some practical applications for the coach or athlete. This seems to be a very cost-effective strategy, only requiring buckets and ice or cool packs. This may be suited best to carnival-style events or multi-day events, and particularly in summer. Repeated use could compound results if done multiple times over the course of a day or carnival, and it seems like there are psychological benefits with the reporting of thermal sensation being decreased. Type of events this may benefit are those that are endurance as well as some strength power. And it is very important that we rehearse this in training, ensuring that the test for the individual response is monitored. This could be affected with how the person individually perceives thermal sensation when their hands are submerged.